We're at Once Upon a Crime in Minneapolis today, talking with Dennis Lehane, the Boston-based author of the Patrick Kenzie and Angie Genaro series, of which there are 5 books currently. He's won a Private Eye Writers of America Shamus Award and the Independent Mystery Booksellers Association Dillis Award. And currently, his newest book is Mystic River, just published this month, February 2001, by HarperCollins. I'm Bruce Southworth, mystery reviewer for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Welcome to Minneapolis.
Hi, thanks.
Mystic River, as I mentioned, is a non-series book, but it's also set in kind of Boston's working class neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Can you give us just a kind of a basic outline of the story or description of the story?
It begins in 1975. There's a little prologue in 1975 in which these 3 boys who are playing on the street are 3 friends, and a car drives up the street. 1 boy gets in the car, 2 don't. And the boy who gets in the car disappears for 4 days, and we can assume some very bad things happen to him. And then 25 years later, the book picks up, and one of the characters has a daughter who's murdered, and that's Jimmy. And then Sean, the second of the characters, second of those boys who's grown up, is the investigating police officer on the murder. And then the third boy, the boy who got in the car, Dave Boyle, gradually becomes the suspect. And it's just 3 days in sort of this neighborhood that's undergoing sort of an assault of gentrification, and this murder just setting everything to boil.
I understand this is a story that you've had in the back of your mind for a long time before it finally got written and published.
Yeah, I had the characters and the title in my mind for quite a while,
Mm-hmm.
and then it just it was kind of gently rapping at the door for a few years, and then it just started knocking really hard, and got to the point where it just pushed its way in completely, and everything else had to clear out, and it took over.
Just it became the time.
Yeah.
The conversation we had a long time ago, you were telling me that once you hit the 5th book in the Patrick Kenzie and Angie Genaro series, that you would probably take a break. Was this book in the back of your mind even then?
No, I don't know. Well,
That was
parts of
about
it
1997.
Parts of it were, but I don't think it was a very conscious decision at that point when we had that conversation. I didn't know specifically that I had this book to tell. I just had some of the characters, and I had this title has been rattling around in my head for 7 or 8 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it wasn't quite that conscious, I think, but some part of me knew that after 5 books there would have to be a break. That there even, and sometimes I have to be reminded of this, but a friend of mine told me when he read Purse of Rain very early on in Galleys, he said, this feels like a final book. And I said, it's certainly an end stop, if you will. And then if I go back to the series, which hopefully I will, it will pick up at a totally different time, totally in terms of it'll be 2 to 3 years removed, and it'll be a whole new, fresh set of, character arcs, I think.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely those 5 books are of a piece.
In all of your books, you've dealt with just a whole lot of different things, from child abuse to racism, gang wars, and kidnappings, and all these different kinds of things, and kind of a whole mix of that in Mystic River.
Yeah.
But you seem to have a lot of common themes running through the book about this. That you mentioned it, the gentrification, the communities changing, and how personal choices can result in things that aren't expected, and so on. What particularly appeals to you about some of those themes? Do you see that as sort of a general truth, or?
No, the theme tends to grow organically out of the book. I'm usually halfway through a book before I realize what it's about thematically.
Mm-hmm.
With Mystic River, there's been a sense growing lately that the ethnic urban enclave that would be familiar to people from Boston or people from New York, maybe Chicago, is something that's dying out. And what's killing it is not drugs or crime or any of that. What's killing it is gentrification. What's killing it is people moving back in, people with a lot of money, young people, moving back into the cities. And they're pushing out those, all of a sudden the neighborhoods, which have been looked down upon for a century, are suddenly attractive as prime real estate. And the people who lived there forever and really gave the place its character, good or bad, are moving out. And so what's being lost good and bad, is the character of a place, the uniqueness of a place. And that's become something that I think was starting to really bother me in the last few years, is this sense of it's happening not only nationally but globally. We're just becoming a world of Starbucks and Abercrombie and Fitches, and we're, places are losing their character. I went back to Dublin this summer, and Dublin seemed in many ways, not altogether, but in many ways seemed indistinguishable from Seattle. And that because they're going through this massive resurgence. They have wealth for the first time in their lives. I mean, it's a prosperous city, truly prosperous for the first time in probably the history of the city. And so coffee shops are moving in, and everybody's dressing in black, and all of a sudden there's these chic monochromatic hotels, and it's great, but it doesn't say Ireland to me. You know what I mean?
It's disturbing in that way, yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's wonderful because they're all really happy. They're like, we got money. You know, we got money. We've never had this before. But it's just kind of, there's a sadness too that I see happening in America as well, where, you know, Tom Wolfe said it, where sooner or later the only way you're going to be able to tell that you've crossed into a new town is by the 7-Eleven. You know, that 7-Eleven has become the new mile marker, the new borderline of towns in America. And I think that's become kind of sad, you know.
Well, I think one of the very distinguishing characteristics of your work is the strong sense of, call it ethnic history or Irish history in many cases,
right,
that a lot of the characters have. And it's not like you are giving a history lesson per se. It's somehow you manage to imbue the characters with that foundation. It's sort of always there. And I think when you contrast that with the gentrification and the neighborhoods changing, you know, that's a very, very sad thing. It's even more striking. So those two work very well together.
Oh, thanks. And again, like a lot of, I think if you intend to go in with a theme, a lot of times, particularly a social theme or a social political theme, what you get is a diatribe, you know, a polemic. You get something very boring, as you know, screed-like. And so with Mystic River, this just grew out organically, and all of a sudden I was middle of the book, and I just went, my God, this is so much about what Dave calls a vanishing tribe. And it's great to be able to put those things in when you don't plan on them, because your focus is still on the quote-unquote psychological thriller aspect of the book, or, you know, who did it? You know, what's going to happen? You know, with these people who are heading for, there's no question from almost page 1, there's an explosion coming. And I think that's all there in the book, and then I get to do all the other stuff. You know, the other part of my mind is satisfied with, the stuff about gentrification, the stuff about fate, the stuff about how you can pull one tiny thread in your life and it affects everything else. And I think there's a lot in the book about bad communication. I think almost everybody in this book is hurt. Who's hurt is hurt because of bad communication. Just, you know,
we can't give it too particularly much away, but
right,
it is very definitely true. I think with let's just say with Dave in particular.
So
very definitely. I don't think any one of the characters ends up sort of in current time where you would have expected them from that opening, that prologue, when they were young children. I mean, it's end up in very different places. So again, it's a reflection of these choices.
Or the threads that were pulled, and they don't even know to some extent how much their lives were affected by this simple thing. One boy gets in the car, 2 don't, and the 2 who don't aren't exactly spared. You know, there's a lot of survivor guilt in them, and they don't know it. They don't recognize it, and it's a lot in the book about people who just don't understand themselves, or trying to run from themselves, which never works.
A lot of those relationships.
Yeah.
They made a comment in another interview one time that I was reading about the ramifications of actions that people take. I think the example you used was, you know, someone shooting someone else, and you know how that affects them individually. And it struck me that that also kind of resonated with P.D. James in her recent autobiography. She was talking about how she tries to look at how violence tends to affect, you know, the everyday life and that sort of thing.
Right.
So is that kind of like another kind of undercurrent that's common throughout the books, do you think?
I don't know about some of the books, but I think certainly in Mystic River, certainly in Gone Baby Gone, certainly in Darkness Take My Hand, those are novels about what violence does, and how it's, you know, I saw the remake of Shaft recently, and there's a scene where he deals with a drug dealer on the corner by going up and beating him up in front of his gang, and I just remember thinking, that's the stupidest scene I've ever seen. I mean, that is just so idiotic that we would believe that that would solve anything. Because the next time Shaft walks down that street, there's going to be 6 kids gunning for him. Mm-hmm. Because the kid who leads that gang has to, or otherwise he loses all respect. And it just, that mindlessness of Hollywood. Oh, yeah, if all it takes really to cure all these problems in the ghettos is a tough guy, you know? It's just so silly to me. So I think Mystic River became very much a novel about, violence solves nothing. Absolutely nothing. When violence is done in this book, nothing good ever comes out of it. Ever.
Absolutely.
And I think that was also a reaction, I think, to some extent, to having written 5 novels, private eye novels, in which there's a lot of gunplay. Mm-hmm. Sort of saying, well, if I have this one chance to write a book that I can write anything I want, I'd like to step away from the gunplay. I'd like to step away from this idea that, the lone brave man can change everything, because I just don't see that happening in the world much.
Yeah, it is a shift away from, it's a different kind of action. It's not that violent action, but there's still an awful lot going on in the book.
Oh, there is. And
yeah,
there's
tremendous.
And I think there's more of a lethal air in this book. I mean, you just know at any second something can go wrong.
Explode, so to speak. Yeah.
So
let's talk a little bit about basically all of the characters. Patrick and Angie and Bubba for the first 5 books. Mm-hmm. As I recall, we're all in high school together. They all knew each other as
no, they knew each other as children, very young children.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you say it's true that those 3 and probably Sean, Dave, and Jimmy from Mystic River kind of all come from essentially the same place? Are they kind of cut of the same cloth?
Yeah, I would say essentially. Yeah, I mean they come from that urban enclave. They come from that world in which the parents worked a lot, and so the kids had to fend for themselves and that sort of thing. And there was a beauty to that world that already is lost. I mean, one of the things I don't see anymore, I don't see kids playing. I don't see kids out in the street. Mm-hmm. Because parents are afraid. Can't let your kids out in the streets, because mm-hmm. God only knows what's out there. I mean, when we were kids, we came home, we dropped off our school bags, and our mothers kicked us out of the house. Get the hell out of the house until dinner, mm-hmm. and we just we went out. It was great. And the world was our playground.
Right.
And now kids don't do that because of A, the fear, and then B, because there's computers, there's video games, there's all these modern things that can replace that thing. Would you rather play Stickball or would you rather play Doom? Well, probably if I was a kid, I'd probably rather play Doom. You know what I mean? Unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But not knowing that I wouldn't get nearly as much out of it. You know what I mean? That playing Stickball, it's much more, you're involved in the world. You're not shut off from it. So I think that's something that all these characters have in common, that they grew up in that time, the last time and place in which kids lived that way.
Yeah. They also have a kind of a for lack of a better word, an everyman feel to them. They're average people. There's nothing, as you mentioned, Super Cop about Patrick Kenzie, for example, or Sean Devine, or
no. Bubba has a certain otherworldly quality to him.
Right. Yeah.
But he's certainly my most outlandish character. But no, I'm just not attracted at all to the superhero. I never have been. I find them extremely boring. I find it extremely boring when a character, because by the very nature of the fact that he's a hero, that means that he A, can't do anything wrong, B, never has to second guess himself, and C, can't get hurt. And I find that just so boring. Why would I read about this guy?
Yeah. Well, I think it would be restrictive to write about somebody like that too. I mean, really.
Yeah.
I mean, there's only a very narrow range.
Exactly.
That sort of thing.
Exactly.
Do you find that the characters, particularly I guess over the series, have evolved? And if so, have they evolved in the way that you've expected them to, or have they kind of taken on a direction of their own?
There's little bits of that, yeah. Sometimes they evolve in places I didn't expect them to go. Other times, I sort of know that they're, that the book is going to be about this sort of arc. I knew that Drink Before the War wouldn't work. A novel about racism wouldn't work unless the main character, who was Patrick, discovered some ugly truths about his own racism. Doesn't work. Darkness Take My Hand, which is very much a novel about violence. It's my most violent novel. It's my most chaotic novel. It doesn't work unless Patrick kind of sees the evil in himself, the ability to commit that violence, to be a violent person. So in that evolutionary sense, yeah, there was things were planned. But Gone Baby Gone was a perfect example of a book in which I gave them the situation, a missing child, and with it came all the questions about child care in this country, and what we do with our kids, and what are the levels of child abuse, what's neglect versus physical abuse, etc. And then I gave them a moral dilemma, and I didn't know how they were going to respond to that moral dilemma until the very final pages, which is why I think that book packs the most emotional wallop of the series. That I still get the most letters about the ending of that book from fans saying, "I hate you for doing this," or "Thank you so much for doing this," or because it's a book in which I waited until the moment where they have to face the final question, the greatest question of the book, which is, what do we do for the welfare of this child, the true welfare of this child? And they have different answers. And I didn't count on that. It just grew out organically from these people who I've written 4 books about. So,
you mentioned Bubba. Yeah, he's definitely an out there sort of character.
Yes.
But he's been compared to Mouse in the Easy Rollins series.
Sure.
And I would also toss in a way, Joe Pike from the Elvis Costello series by Robert Grace. I mean, he's one of those people who's always on edge and dangerous. You don't know who Pike is.
Yeah. Oh, sure. And Hawk.
In the Spencer
Parker. I mean, you got to say he's the one who really brought that character into the mainstream. That was Parker. Parker started that archetype in many ways. So.
Do you think that's a kind of this is almost a gimmick in a sense, to have this one character who's just so out there, as somebody described it, psychopath with a heart of gold?
Yeah. Well, the other people call them the Deus Ex Machina. It's the sort of dark angel of the character, the dark mirror of the main character.
Okay.
And this is a weird 2-pronged question. There are 2 Bubbas, because I write 2 types of books. I've discovered, after I did not plan this, but in hindsight, it seems that I write tragedies and I write entertainments. That my books either have major classical tragic arcs, or they're just entertaining. We're just going to have a little fun here. They're homages, or they're just saying, I'd like to maybe step away a little bit from, the moral depths and just give you a good, hard detective book, The Bubba who shows up in the entertainments is certainly much more a sort of gimmicky Bubba. He's a little more lovable. He's a little more, dare I say, cuddly. At least to Patrick and Angie, who are the only people he loves. The Bubba who shows up in the other books is a very lethal, very evil character. And he can barely be restrained. There's a scene in Darkness Take My Hand in which even Patrick can't control him. And I that's my way of saying, no, it's not just a gimmick. No, this is a guy who is truly the dark mirror of the main character, and something that the main character, I think, if I do write another Patrick Angie, that I think is the one thing I'll tackle. That Patrick gets off a little easy with Bubba being able to step in and do some dirty work, and I need to question that, because this is a guy who has to be conscious of it. He has to know that he's avoided, say, killing somebody in cold blood because Bubba did it for him.
Right, he's kind of unleashed something.
Yeah,
kind of,
and I think sooner or later that relationship has to be explored.
Something, it's true, I think, you have to figure out why Bubba is so close to them, why they're so close to him. I know there's probably a lot in their child.
Oh, there is, and there's some things, each book tells you a little bit more. Prayers for Rain has the most information on the whole, their friendship, and why they are so tight. I mean, basically they brought him food when he was living on the streets, when they were all kids. And risked beatings from their own parents because of it, because they were taking food off tables that didn't have much food in the first place. And so that's where the bond formed. It's in a sort of absolute loyalty. And Bubba's like a dog. You take a wild dog and you feed it, you treat it right, it will sooner or later become your dog, and you will be its alpha. And in a way, Patrick is Bubba's alpha.
An interesting way to describe it, yeah. For you, what's the starting point of a book? Do you come at it with character idea first, a plot idea first?
Character.
Or?
It's always character. It's always. I never have the plots until it's embarrassing how late I get the plots. No, it's characters, and it's sometimes it's lines, sometimes it's a sentence. Mystic River, 7 or 8 years ago, I got a sentence in my head. Brendan Harris loved Katie Marcus like crazy, loved her like movie love, and that thing just kept running a continuous loop in my head, and that became the first line of the 3rd chapter of Mystic River. So a lot of times it's a line that'll just start bumping, and sometimes you got to trust. I tend to trust my subconscious a lot, because I feel like I've trained my conscious. That's what you go to school for. That's what you study for, to train your conscious to the point where your subconscious can be allowed to kind of roam free a little bit, because the muscles are in shape. So with Mystic River, I just started with Sean Devine and Jimmy Marcus on that street, and then one day they were just on that street, and I said, they need somebody here, and then Dave Boyle came trotting on in, and then it just sort of came along that way. It just began to grow, and I knew that there was a murdered woman, and that this guy was in love with her like the love of his life. They were like the Romeo and Juliet. But I didn't know she was Jimmy's daughter until all of a sudden I went, oh, that would make perfect sense. Because else, why the hell else is he in this story, And so that's how it grows, like that.
Once you get somewhat into that, then do you just sort of let it flow, or do you tend to sort of stop and outline a little bit ahead so that you kind of know where you're going? Or
I walk my dogs. My dogs every morning, and as I'm walking my dogs, I think of what I'm going to write that day. It's a great routine. It's I used to have a much more scattershot routine, in which I would write in these huge bursts and never worry about writing in the wrong direction or anything. But now I'm older, I'm married, I'm domesticated. I can't be burning the midnight oil, essentially. So I have this routine where I take my 2 dogs to the river, a river that inspired the park in Mystic River, the park where Katie is found dead. And I just walk along and I think, and then I go home and I work on that. It's never as, writing is just messy. It's just a messy form. Creating fiction is messy. And those who outline, I deeply admire them, and those who can have a very regimented way of structuring a novel, I'm just in awe of. But most people I know, most writers I know, myself included, it's so much more messier than that, and it's so much harder to explain. I can say, yes, I do this and I do this, but then that may change for 100 pages of a book. I may be very regimented for 100 pages, and then that just spins out, and then I just get a little looser again, and it's a creative process, and it's hard to describe. But when I do outline, I find it's too constricting, and I can't write.
Kind of like back to writing that superhero thing. You're just boxed in.
Yeah, boxed in. I can't get those. The reason I write, the happiest thing that happens to me when I write is what Flannery O'Connor labeled happy accidents. That thing you didn't plan, but the moment it comes up, the moment you write that line, the moment you introduce that character, you realize in some weird way it was inevitable since the moment you picked up the pen, and that's that trusting the subconscious thing.
You told me this conversation we had quite a long time ago that was an interesting statement, that your odd-numbered books were very, the odd-numbered books were easy to write and the even-numbered books were hard.
Yeah.
So that would put Mystic River as an
hard
even-numbered book.
Murder.
And that stayed consistent, huh?
Yes, stayed consistent. But that is the odd-numbered books. The even-numbered books tend to be the ones with the tragic arcs. The even-numbered books tend to be sort of the entertainments, if you will. And I use that term very loosely. I'm not saying they're just fun and frothy, but they got a little less going on underneath the surface. And then very much, Mystic River was classically structured as a tragedy. I mean, if there's one thing I knew, it was this character is going to start here. One character is going to lose his soul. One character is going to lose his life. One character is going to find himself. That was what I was telling myself the whole time I wrote this book.
Yeah.
So.
I think it worked terrifically well.
Oh, thank you.
Are you planning to carry on with these characters at all?
No. It's a one shot. That was
one shot.
Yeah, and I wanted. I'm very happy with it. I'm rarely happy with my own work, so it's pretty exciting. But no, I don't envision going back to them. Certainly not right away. If 5 years from now, all of a sudden I go, I wonder what they're up to, down there in old East Bucky. You know what I mean? Then I'll go. I'll look into them.
Well, certainly there's enough questions that one could ask about all of that.
Oh yeah, there's that whole, the ending is definitely left a little bit. There's another story that could be told, but I didn't think of it that way. I just thought I told the story I meant to tell. I didn't realize there'd be this other thread until I got to the end, and then I went, I guess, oh, well, I'm not going to pretend it's not there, so I drop it in there, but it wasn't meant as a,
Continuation.
I'm having an old friend for dinner. You know what I mean?
Right.
It wasn't that, it wasn't that sort of immediate sequel on the way.
Right.
So
if you're not necessarily going to revisit these folks, at least in the immediate future, and it sounds like you're not sure about the Patrick and Angie's coming up crop, what are you working on now?
I'm working on another book that's set in the same neighborhood.
Oh.
I think I'll do my Patrick and Angie's and my Buckingham books. That's a fictitious neighborhood. It doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I love that the corner store is mine and the gas station is where I put it. And, it's great. So I think that the next book will be set in East Buckingham, but beyond that, all I have right now are characters.
So you wouldn't project even, how far out that might be. You're kind of on a book a year schedule.
No, I'm off that now.
Are you?
I'm off. I'm about a book every year and a half now.
Okay.
To
Good
2
for you,
years.
bad for us.
To 2 years. Yeah. But it's better for everybody because I do better work when I have time.
Can stretch it out a little bit.
So.
Okay. Well, I think that we've actually kind of run out of our particular time here. I want to thank you very, very much for the time.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bruce.
Good to see you again.
Okay, you too.